Hey everyone, Chris Dutton here, and welcome to Microsoft Power BI, up and running with Power BI Desktop. Now, if you're looking for a hands-on, project-based approach to learning business intelligence, you've come to the right place. In this course, you'll be playing the role of lead analyst for AdventureWorks Cycles, a global manufacturing company. Your mission? Design and execute an end-to-end business intelligence solution from scratch. But the good news is, I'll be right there with you, guiding you through the ins and outs of Power BI and sharing crystal clear explanations and helpful pro tips each step of the way. Our journey will begin with an intro to Power BI Desktop and then transition through each phase of the business intelligence workflow. We'll begin by connecting and shaping our source data with Power BI's query editing tools, and then explore concepts like cardinality, normalization, and filter context as we build out a full-scale data model. From there, we'll add calculated columns and measures using data analysis expressions or DAX, and finally take things to the finish line by designing dynamic interactive reports using Power BI's visualization tools. So what do you say? Ready to dive in? Sign up today and get lifetime access to over 10 hours of high-quality video content, downloadable project files and resources, course quizzes and homework assignments, and one-on-one expert support, all backed by a 30-day, 100% guarantee. Thanks again for choosing this course. Now let's get started. Next up, we've got text-specific tools. And looking at the Transform tab in the Query Editor, you'll notice that Power BI groups different sets of tools together based on their purpose or function. So in this case, we'll find all of our text-specific tools grouped together at the end of the ribbon. And within this group, we have some really interesting, powerful options. For one, we can split up a column based on a specific character or delimiter, or based on a number of characters. We can format any of our text columns using basic formatting options like lowercase, uppercase, proper case, which is capitalizing the first letter of each word, or we can use tools like trim, which eliminates leading and trailing spaces, or clean, which does the same thing and also eliminates non-printable characters. Now you might be thinking that those trim and clean options really aren't that helpful until you run into the case where you have one trailing space in your data set. And trust me, this will drive you crazy the first time you experience it until you figure it out. And the problem is, as human beings, we are incapable of seeing a trailing space. It's completely invisible to us, and it looks exactly the same as another data point without that trailing space. But to Excel, or in this case to Power BI, it looks like a completely different and unique value. So in cases like that, trim or clean can be great tools just to standardize and help avoid issues like that, especially if you're working with really messy or unstructured text data. We also have some great extract tools. We can extract a certain subset of characters from a string based on a specified length. We can extract the first or last number of characters or a range, but where it gets really interesting is using delimiters. So we can tell Power BI that we want to return all of the characters before a specific delimiter or symbol or character, or after it, or between two distinct delimiters. And there are also some advanced options as well that allow you to specify whether you search from the left side of the string or the right, and if you want to skip a certain number of instances of the delimiter before returning text. So some really great flexibility there with those extract tools. So you may have noticed that some of the tools here are grayed out and inactive, like merge columns or parse. And that brings up a really important point, which is that this toolbar is completely dynamic based on what you've selected. So if you've only selected a single column, the merge columns option is irrelevant, so you can't even click it. You'd have to select multiple columns in order to activate that option. And then taking that even further, if you've selected a column that's numerical instead of text, this entire group of tools might be replaced by number-specific tools instead. So just remember that the entire ribbon, the entire toolbar that you're seeing here will dynamically change based on your selections. Now, one more very important point before we shift gears into Power BI. Anytime you see this yellow box that says, hey, this is important, you guessed it, I'm about to talk about something important. So that means focus in, pay attention, Stop playing with the dog or checking Facebook, because this is something that is going to come up time and time again in the course, and it's really, really important for you to fully grasp and understand. So what I want to talk about now is the difference between transform and add column, because this is something that confused me for longer than I care to admit. And what I was noticing was that the same tools, in fact, the same identical sets of tools, kept popping up in different places. And for the longest time, I just thought this was really confusing and redundant until I realized that the outcome is completely different depending on where you select that tool. So when you select a tool from within the Transform tab, you're essentially modifying or overwriting the column that you've selected. But when you choose a tool from the Add Column tab, you're creating a brand new column to your table. So that may sound really obvious when I say it now, but I guarantee as you're learning this tool and as you're playing around with the query editor, you will at some point in time select the tool from the wrong tab. And that's okay, because obviously nothing's set in stone. It's as simple as just deleting that last applied step and you're back where you started. But it is something to keep in mind, and hopefully that will help you at least understand where you're going wrong and why these tools appear in multiple places. So let's open up Power BI and get our hands dirty with some of these text tools. All right, so here I am in my AdventureWorks report. Go ahead and open it up as well. I'm going to head back into the Get Data option, click Text CSV again. This time, instead of products, let's go into AdventureWorks Customers and double click. Here we've got our preview. All of these default settings look good. So I can go ahead and click Edit to launch the query editor. All right, so first things first, here's our AW product lookup query that we created in the last lecture. And now we see a second for AdventureWorks customer. So let's go through those two steps that we do every time we get in here to the query editor. We're going to start with the table name. And for the sake of consistency, let's go with AW underscore customer lookup. The last file that we loaded was called product lookup, and it was called product lookup for a reason, because it had all sorts of information about individual products, where each row represented a unique product key and each column represented some attribute about that product. Now, similarly, here we're looking at customer data instead. So I can press enter, lock in my table name, and as I look in the preview here, as you can see, I've got a customer key and then all sorts of attributes about my customers. So let's go ahead and finish our quick QA. We've got column headers that look correct. Let's look at the data values very quickly. Our key is a whole number, which is good. We've got names, which are strings or text fields, which are good. We've got a birth date column, which is a date, represented by this little calendar icon in the top left. And then as we scroll through, marital status, gender, email, all text. This one's interesting. It actually recognized the annual income field as a currency or fixed decimal. That's fine. We can leave it as is. And then we've got total children, education level, occupation, and a homeowner yes, no flag, all text. So check those boxes. Everything looks good. And now we can proceed to our table transformations. So first things first, let's scroll over. I've got my eye on these name columns because they're all uppercase and that looks silly to me. So I'd like to make those proper case instead. So let's go ahead and select the prefix column, go into add column. We'll find our text tools here. And what we want to do is go into the format tools and click capitalize each word, which is proper case. And when we do that, it created a new column here at the end of our table, which is essentially a duplicate version of our prefix column, but with the correct capitalization. And you can see that the header name has been defaulted to capitalize each word, which is just totally ridiculous. And as you probably have guessed by now, the reason this happened was because we accessed that format tool through the add column tab, when what we really wanted to do was simply overwrite the existing column and transform it. So we should have accessed the formatting tools through the transform tab instead. And so that's what I'm talking about. It's very easy to make these kind of mistakes. So you really just have to be vigilant about knowing which tab you're in each time you create a calculated column. But no worries, the good news is that it's a very easy fix. You can't Control Z to undo here. The equivalent is just going into your applied steps and pressing the X to remove that last step that we just created. So now I'll scroll back, select the prefix column again, make sure that I'm in my Transform tab, and go through that same process. Format, capitalize each word, and there you go. It's overwritten the values into the format that I'd prefer. Now to do the same thing to the first and last name columns, I could do them individually, or I can select one, hold the Shift key, click the other, that will grab both of them at the same time. And let's do the 2-for-1 special. Capitalize each word. So now I have a nice clean prefix, first name and last name. So that's helpful, but I'd really like to have the customer's full name accessible in a single field as well. So what that means is that I'd like to merge all 3 of these columns together and separate them with a space to create a brand new column that I'll name full name. So what I've done is select prefix, I've held Shift, selected last name to grab all 3, and instead of clicking merge, warning signs, we're still in the Transform tab. I need to make sure to go into Add Column instead and access the Merge tool from here. So when I click Merge Columns, it gives me a little dialog box with some options. In this case, I do want a separator in between the values. I want that to be a space. And let's name our new column full name. So I'll press OK. And you can see it's added a new step. When I scroll to the right, there we go. We got our new full name column. Looks good. We've got spaces between the names. And now one thing to note, just kind of a side note, it added this step, but it kind of gave it a default name that says inserted merged column. Now, as I click through, it's pretty easy to see exactly what column was merged and what was added. But if we want to make this even more clear, I can always right click and rename that step. And instead of just saying inserted merged column, I can actually type full name. That just makes it a little bit more explicit what's going on. I inserted a new column and it's called full name. All right, so next up, I want to make a couple more changes. I want to really focus on this email address column here. And the first thing that I want to do is extract the username from this email. But the problem is I can't just say, give me the first 5 characters, because that would work for John 24, but not Eugene 10. So it's got to be a dynamic number of characters from the left side of this email address based on the location of that @ symbol. So this is where we're going to use that extract based on delimiter option. So let's go ahead and select email address. I want to add a new column for username. I'm going to use the extract tools here. So again, not just a default length, not an explicit number of characters, but I want the text before a delimiter. So here you go. All I need to do is say the delimiter that you're looking for is that @ sign. If we drill into the advanced options, this is where you can say, search from the left or search from the right. You can skip a certain number of instances of the delimiter. In this case, we don't need any of that. All we want is the text before the @ sign. So press OK, added a new column. As you can see, it didn't let me name the column at the same time, but it did give me the values that I want. So what I can do here is just double click the column header and I can give it a name. Let's call it username. Now let's do one more similar example, but with one more complication. So going back to our email address, what if this time, instead of the username, we want to return the domain name? And the domain is anything that falls between the @ symbol and the .com at the end of the string. To do that, I can use the same extract tools, but this time I want the text between 2 delimiters. So I can go into this option here and I can say my start delimiter is the @ sign and my end delimiter is either the period, or I can type .com. Both will do the same thing. And when I press OK, same exact idea. It's given me a new column with the string or the characters between those 2 delimiters. I can change the column title to something like domain and press enter. And there you have it. So very, very easy way to do some pretty complex stuff. So one last adjustment to make to this domain column here, I want to get rid of the dash and replace it with a space. So to do that, I'm going to transform the existing column, not add a new one, and you'll see this other grouping of tools that say any column. That means they're not text or number or date specific. They can be applied in a number of different circumstances. In this case, I'll find the replace tool right here in this set. So it's as simple as it sounds. I can find the dash and I can replace it with a space. Press OK. Now I've got adventure space works. And why don't we go ahead and format that capitalized in proper case, and we are all set. So there you go. We used the formatting options. We added columns. We transformed columns. We used the extract tools based on delimiters. We merged columns. Some really good examples of how these different text functions can be used to enhance and clean and transform a data table. So I think we're all good with customer lookup. The only thing left is to go back to our home tab and click close and apply to load that data into our file. And as soon as that loads up, we'll see that it's going to appear as another object right here in our relationships tab, right next to our friend product lookup. We'll also see it available in our field list, accessible in both the data view and the report view. So there you have it, query editing text tools. Okay, so by this point, you should be pretty comfortable with the basic query editing tools, your date tools, your text tools, your number tools. And for the most part, they've all been pretty straightforward, pretty intuitive to use. But there are some pretty interesting, maybe not so intuitive tools available in the query editor as well. And one thing that I want to cover now is the idea of pivoting and unpivoting a table. So the way I describe it, pivoting is kind of just a fancy way to describe the process of turning distinct row values into columns, which is called pivoting, or turning columns into rows, which is called unpivoting. Now, it sounds pretty simple, pretty straightforward on the surface, but it's actually a little bit tricky to get a hang of, at least it was for me. So I'm a visual learner, and what I'm about to show you is what finally caused it to click for me. So imagine this simple two-column table. You've got years in the first column, and you've got a numerical field like unit sales in the second column. If we were to select the year column and pivot this table, we would essentially take the year in each row and turn it into its own column. So now instead of a row for 1994, we have a column for 1994. Same goes for 95, 96, 97, 98. So we've basically flipped that table from a vertical format up to a horizontal format. We've turned rows into columns. Now on the flip side, if we started out with the table in that horizontal format and we selected the years in the first row, we could unpivot to transform it into that vertical form. In other words, we take those years, which had been columns, and transform them into rows. So my little mental tip here is that I imagine that the table is kind of like on a hinge in that upper left corner. Pivoting is like rotating it up from vertical to horizontal, and unpivoting is like rotating it down from horizontal to vertical. Now, one thing to note, there's another tool in the query editor called transpose, and that works in a really similar way, but the difference is that it doesn't recognize unique values. So if you're dealing with a table like the one we're looking at here, where we don't have duplicate years or unit sales, pivoting and transposing would yield the exact same result. But if instead we had two rows of 1994, for instance, pivoting would collapse both of those rows into a single 1994 column, while transposing would preserve both versions and keep two separate columns, each with a 1994 header. So one way to think about it is that transpose is kind of clunkier, it's kind of brute force. It just takes the entire table and it just flips it on its side. So I actually have a little demo file that I'm going to show you, because you do have to really see this happening in real time to understand what's going on. So let me show you what that looks like. All right, so this file isn't available as part of the course resources, so just sit back and follow along for this one. I'm going to go ahead and grab my data as a CSV, and I've called this file Unpivot Demo. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up right here in the query editor. And right off the bat, you can tell this table is a little funky. There's some things wrong with this table. Number one, I don't have column headers, which is not that surprising. The column headers here are actually years. So when Power BI took a look at the sample of this table, it said, okay, you've got numerical values in each column. I have no way of knowing if that's a year or if it's a similar value to the one in row 2 or 3. It's an easy fix. You can just go ahead and click Use First Row as Headers. And there you go. Now our years have been promoted to headers. So we've made one improvement, but this table is still far from ideal. And what we have here is information about unit sales and revenue. We've got 2 different metrics broken down by year, 94, 95, each as columns. And as an analyst, as someone who needs to take this data and interpret it and analyze it and explore it, this type of table format can create a lot of headaches. Really what we're looking for here is a rectangular table with each dimension or metric as a column and each observation as a row. So ideally what I want to transform this table into is a format that has 3 columns: year, sales, and revenue. That would give me a format that I could take and plug into my model and analyze in any way that I choose. So let's see if we can do that with our pivoting and unpivoting tools. Now, first things first, I don't like the fact that I have years in columns, so I want to turn these columns into rows. And to do that, I'm rotating down from horizontal to vertical or unpivoting. So what I can do is go ahead and select all of my year columns, go into Transform, and then press this Unpivot Columns button. And there you go, it's transformed my year columns into year rows. It's labeled that column attribute, which is okay, we'll fix that later. And that hasn't totally solved my problem. I still have unit sales and total revenue as my rows instead of columns, but it's gotten me one step closer. And one thing to note before I move to the next step is that there's another way I could have done that. And let me just remove that step. And instead of selecting all 5 of these year columns, I could have selected this first column and chosen the Unpivot Other Columns option. So you arrive at the exact same place, just another way to get there. So I've gotten a little bit closer. I've got values here, I've got years in a column. The only adjustment I need to make now is turn these unit sales and total revenue labels from rows into columns. So I need to do the reverse of what I just did and take this vertical orientation and pivot it up into a horizontal. So you guessed it, I'm going to select that first column, pivot the column, and this says, okay, where do your values live? Do they live in the attribute column or the value column? In this case, the value column. Press OK, and there you have it. So now we've got first column, which is attribute for year. We can go ahead and name that column year. We've got a unit sales column and a total revenue column. And this is a table format that I can work with as an analyst. So that was a great demo of how both pivot and unpivot can be used to kind of wrestle a messy table format into something more workable. Now, last quick demo here. If I take this all the way back to the start, just delete each of these steps, back to square one, because I'm not dealing with any duplicate values here, I could use transpose in this case as well. And in fact, that's actually a more efficient way to do this. I could select this entire table as is and essentially flip it or rotate it onto its side using that transpose option. So in the transform menu, I can just press transpose here, and that pretty much did the trick. It put years on a column, it put unit sales on a column, and it put revenue on the third column. The only thing we have to do now is use those first rows and promote the headers. And there you go. We've gotten to our same ending point using both combination of pivot and unpivot and transpose. So again, kind of tricky to work with at first, but these tools can be really, really helpful when you need them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and delete that query that I just created. There we go. Close out of the editor. And there you have it, pivoting and unpivoting. Hey everyone, Chris Dutton here, and welcome to Microsoft Power BI, up and running with Power BI Desktop. Now, if you're looking for a hands-on, project-based approach to learning business intelligence, you've come to the right place. In this course, you'll be playing the role of lead analyst for AdventureWorks Cycles, a global manufacturing company. Your mission? Design and execute an end-to-end business intelligence solution from scratch. But the good news is, I'll be right there with you, guiding you through the ins and outs of Power BI and sharing crystal clear explanations and helpful pro tips each step of the way. Our journey will begin with an intro to Power BI Desktop and then transition through each phase of the business intelligence workflow. We'll begin by connecting and shaping our source data with Power BI's query editing tools, and then explore concepts like cardinality, normalization, and filter context as we build out a full-scale data model. From there, we'll add calculated columns and measures using data analysis expressions or DAX, and finally take things to the finish line by designing dynamic, interactive reports using Power BI's visualization tools. So what do you say? Ready to dive in? Sign up today and get lifetime access to over 10 hours of high-quality video content, downloadable project files and resources, course quizzes and homework assignments, and one-on-one expert support, all backed by a 30-day, 100% guarantee. Thanks again for choosing this course. Now let's get started.